In this tutorial, we're going to look at using the cutter. The cutter inside of Harmony is a masking node. It allows us to do a normal mask or an invert mask, and we'll learn how each of those can be utilized in our projects. So I've created some artwork for an eye. We have the highlight, the pupil, the iris, the white of the eye, pivot points are set. I do have a lower lid and an upper lid. We're not going to be using those just yet. We'll look at how we can use those. That they will introduce some additional complexity into our node network. So we want to start out and just understand a little bit about how the cutter works. And I've also added in an artwork layer for the head so that the eye has somewhere to exist. Working with the eye here, you'll notice that the highlight is attached to the eye. It doesn't move with the iris and pupil because the highlight only moves when the light hitting the eye moves. It's not part of the iris or pupil. Sometimes we attach it to it just for simplicity, but realistically it should be separate so that as the eye is moving, we're moving behind that because that's a more realistic view of how things should work. So right now, if I move the iris and pupil, you can see how it moves and it's not contained by the eye. And what we want to do is we want to use the color information from the white of the eye to mask the iris and the pupil. So to do that, we need a cutter node. So I'll just type cutter, and now I have a cutter node that I can work with. Now, if I take this cutter node and hold down Alt or Option and drag to iris, it will insert the cutter node into it. So that's a handy trick that you can use, so you don't have to start dragging connections around. And to disconnect, remember we hold down Alt or Option and drag it out. So that's a nice way to work. So when I have the cutter here on the iris, now if I look at the left side, it has another connection port. This connection port is for the matte or the mask. So I want the white of the eye to mask it, and we'll see that it disappeared. So we want to change that. We want to invert it. So I can click the yellow box and then click this square and it inverts it. Because right now, we'll notice how it went away, but if I grab this and move it, you'll see how it disappears. Now the eye or the pupil doesn't have a cutter on it, so it's not being masked. So you can see how we're sandwiching it there. So that's not quite what we want. We want this cutter inverted. The quick way to invert it is I double click right here and double click again, it goes back. Now if I double click, we'll see that it moved. But the cutter is only affecting the iris. So I could add a second cutter. Alternatively, what I could do is I could add an additional composite. And I don't want that composite there. I want the composite to be for the pupil. Actually, well, we can leave that there. And we don't want that connecting. We want the composite to be for the pupil and the iris. Now, we want both of those to be cut by the white of the eye. Now, you may notice a little problem here that the line, because the white of the eye is behind this, so when we move this around, we can see how, yeah, the line is not quite there. And if that doesn't bother you, fine, but in most cases, that's not what we want to do. But you can see how it's now using the information from this layer to cut it. So what we need to do is we need to find the line information for the white of the eye, and well, we're really using the color, we're not using the line to do our cutting. That's how we want it to cut. So I'll hit return or enter, and this time I'm going to type color, and we'll grab our color art layer, and then once again line art layer, and we'll grab some line art. So when we do this, we'll see that we want our color art here. Whoop, didn't mean to zoom in quite as much. And we also, let's just put these a little bit tighter. And then we'll go and grab the line art. And you can see where things are sitting, but now I can go put the line art on top of it, and now it cuts it. But what we usually do is we just use the color art as our cutter. Now if I don't have the line art there and the line art's behind, you'll see how it's halfway in between. Remembering that the color draws to the middle of a stroke. So if we just put the line art on top, now we're golden. So that allows us to use the cutter. We're just using one color or cutter, and then we're separating our line and color artwork. And now I can animate the eye so that our characters can be looking in a variety of directions and no longer just have a straight ahead fixed eye. Now the pupil is separated out because there are times when you're working where you may want to scale up the pupil as part of your animation. And to scale from your pivot point, from the middle, I hit the wrong modifier key. If I start scaling and hold down Shift, it keeps it proportional, so we can see that it now scaled up that pupil. Now the pupil does have the line art color around it. If we want, we can have the line art and the fill for the pupil. If you prefer, you could make both black on it. Let's check the node, go into our drawing. So when we look here, change the color to black if that is your preference. So now we can see that we have big people, and looking at that now, I think I kind of like that. So go back to my transform or animation tool. Now I can scale it down or scale it up so it's like whoa, whoa. So we could animate this as part of our project. So this is the first step in working with a cutter. Sometimes we need to cut multiple things with one cutter. We could do it without. We would just have more connections. So we would have the iris and the pupil going into separate cutters. Each cutter would be cut by the color art, and then both would be showing up inside our composite for this eye. That is certainly one way to work, but generally if you can simplify the number of connections that you have by using additional composites, it will make your bigger composites a little easier to manage. Now it would be nice if this character did have eyelids so that we can animate those. And if I go in and want to animate them, you could say I can move it up and down. But if I want my eyelids to be cut by the eye shape so they just stay within the eye, that is another option. So if we decide that we want to animate our eyes, it looks like I need to tweak my tool properties here, go back onto peg selection mode. I did have a crash recently, so then that did wonk a few things out. So we could just have our lids move like this, and you can just click on them and move them and size them. I have overly large eyelids right now. I don't think they need to necessarily be this wide, but I think I went a little overboard on trying to make them wide enough, because when I'm masking, then I don't really care about exactly how wide they are. So what we want to do with these lids is we want to repeat this same kind of process. Now, because these are moving independently, we can combine them together with a composite if we're so inclined. So I'm going to have a composite here. We're going to need a cutter that we will then be cutting that composite, and then that composite will be somewhere like there. And now we drag these up. Now when we cut it, we're going to again be using the same color art. And notice this cutter has not been inverted, so I can either click the yellow box and click inverted, or just double click on the little eye mask icon and it inverts that cutter. And I like how this looks a little bit better. So now if I select this to animate it and move it, that's great. As long as I leave part of it visible, I can grab it. But if they fall out of view like this, that's problematic, because now it's very difficult to select them. I can have it selected there and then use the arrow keys to move it up. And if I use the arrow keys, hold down Shift and an arrow key, it moves 10 pixels at a time. And once it's on screen, I can work with it. But what would be nice is to have a handle, a way of grabbing this eyelid so we can do something with it. And this is where we're going to work with one of our additional art layers that we used previously, and this is overlay. So we're going to grab the overlay from our two layers. So because they're going into that, we're going to grab their overlay and we will just put that into our composite. Now right now there's no visible change because we don't have any overlay artwork. So let's take care of that. So the way that we do this in Harmony is we make what are called tabs. We make little handles that show up by our artwork with a small little representation of what it is so that we can grab it. So I'm going to just switch my color. For tabs, we typically use a transparent color for it. Now let me go on to the upper lid here and I'll switch over to drawing. And I'm going to just turn on the light bulb so I can see in relation to my whole scene. So I know my eye is there. And what I want to do is to use my select. Well, before I use the select tool, I want to draw where I'm going to put it. And I will be doing that on the overlay. So I click the little eyeball here to turn it on. And going into my line art, if I select that, I can copy that, I can go to my overlay, and I can just turn this off, turn that off. Now I can paste that in. So what we want to do is we're going to put a shrunk down version of this. So I'll just hold down Shift and shrink that down onto a circle. Now I want to set my circle with my tab color, which is transparent. And if you forgot how to make a transparent color, you click under alpha and modify that. So in single wheel mode, alpha is right there. Multi-wheel mode, alpha is in the same kind of spot right there. All right, so I have that color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a circle to contain this. Going to fill it with that. So that teal color or cyan color is transparent. Now I can just take these lines here and I zoom in so I can actually grab them and move them over. Okay, we're getting some weird things happening here. I'll just shrink that down a little bit. That's okay. Okay, we had the blue there. I don't know what happened to it, but now we will go and put this on top. So if I go back into my node view, we'll see we've added this transparency. Go back into camera, we can see we put that there. And that's probably a little bit too big, so I want to even shrink all of this down a little bit more by turn on the light box so we can see. Well, my light box is misbehaving quite badly today. I think since I did have a recent crash and now it's coming back from it, it was messed up. All right, I want to put this a little higher in relation to where that eye is. Go back into camera. Okay, right about there. So the good part about this overlay layer is if I'm using my animation tool and click, we can see it allows me to select that lid. Click off, I can just click here and it gives me a handle outside my eye to click it. So if that eyelid is not on the eye, I can move that all the way up. Or I can move it all the way down, giving him a squinty eye. So we're going to repeat that process for the other eye. And to do that, I'm just going to select all of this, copy it, and then I'll go into my lower lid. And well, I don't want to be in drawing, I want Lightbox back on. See, it's showing me the upper lid when it should also be showing me, oh, there we go. Forgot to click the eyeball, so now I get everything. So now we're inside the lower lid. It's overlay. And what I can do is I'm going to paste this here, move it down for the lower lid, and this time I'll just get rid of that. Let's go into the line art, copy that, go back to overlay, paste, shrink it way down. And because that line is hard to click on or select, I'll just use Shift and the arrow keys to line it up. Going back into our camera view, we can now see if I use my animation tool, we can move that eye, we can move this one. So kind of rocking our lids now. Using these tabs is the term that we refer to control our animation. Now one thing we're going to have to do with that, if I click over and look at my render view, you'll see that those render out with it, and we don't want that. There's one more node we want to look at, and that is visibility. Visibility gives us an option. We can have it in the render view, or we can have it in our OpenGL view. And if we look at our two views here, we typically work in our OpenGL view. Our render view shows when we have different layer effects and transparencies and a bunch of other things at work, how they're all interacting. So if I turn off soft render, it goes away, but now if I go back into OpenGL, it's there. And if you decide that, well, you just don't want to see those tabs anymore, you can just click on this layer and just go deactivate, or okay, I didn't expect that. I wonder if I switch over to my view, that view is fine. But we're going to leave our overlay layer active, but you could just go into your visibility if you want to shut off your tabs and do that. Or you could even just sever the connection, but generally we don't want to go that hardcore. So we've covered a number of different things here that allow us to animate our eyes. We're using composites, cutters, visibility nodes, isolating the overlay node. Now, if I grab the eye here, I can now move the eye. We can see that I don't have to use a cutter for the eye in relation to the eyelids because the eyelids are on top of the eye parts. They're on top of the highlight as well. That's why we don't have to use more cutters, but then we're getting clean lines as we work our way across. So with this, we're able to create an eye. Now you may be noticing that, wow, things are starting to, that's a lot of layers for a simple body part. Eyes can often be complex. There's a lot of things going on. Other body parts, noses and ears, are typically just a single drawing layer and a single peg, so they're far less cumbersome. But because the eyes have moving parts, these are things that we have to deal with. So another thing that we can do in the interest of working smarter and not harder is I can clone this eye. So effectively, it's not going to be separate artwork. So if I update the artwork, it will update it for both, but it can move independently based on pegs. So that's a useful technique that I can use. The first thing that I want to do is I want to group this because it's just going to simplify my node view here considerably, because otherwise we end up with a double amount of the layers that we have here. So if I want to group this eye with all from my composite up to the master selected, I will right click, go to group, and we have two options under group. We have group selection and group selection with composite. We already have a composite in the collection of layers that we're working with here, so I'm just going to choose group selection. And when I do that, I will see that it made this group. And I'm going to just rename that, and this will be my I-G for group. So what we can do with this node, and we want to add a peg to it, so I will put a peg on this node so that I can work with it. We want to adjust where that pivot point is, so it's up where the eye is. So now that group has a pivot point on it. I can now select this node. And we don't want to copy paste, because when we copy paste, it's creating a duplicate that if I move one, it will move the other. If I change artwork on one, it changes the other. And we're okay with the change in the artwork part, because that's what we would have with the clone, and we'll see that, where we'll go and recolor some things and see how it affects it. So with my node selected, I go to my node menu under nodes, and we have clone, drawings and timing, and drawings only. So when I choose drawings only, it cloned it. Here is my clone up here. And now this peg, I'm just going to copy this because currently this clone is, it positioned it right there, and we'll be able to see it in a moment once I drag it over to my main scene composite. And now to make sure I'm not selecting anything wrong, I'll just, with my transform tool active, I'll hold down shift and hit the arrow and move it over, and we'll see that we have two eyes here. If I zoom in on it, now we have two eyes, so that saved me having to create two versions of the artwork. Now if I select the pupil and select the iris, I can move it and see that it's moving independently. This eyelid is moving independently of the other. So I'm going to delete that. Oh, and we can delete that too, we don't need it. Now let's see what happens if I go under nodes and choose drawings and timing. Let's drag this, connect it into my scene, copy paste that peg over. So So we know it's there with that peg selected. Shift, go over here, shift and move it over. So if I click on this eyelid and move it, we'll see that both are moving. So if we're cloning drawings and timing, it's going to end up, I mean, that's handy, and we could make a tab that allows me to select both eyes at the same time so I don't have to move one independently. So we could do that. And we could make it so that I only have one tab for moving, the lids up and down. But more often than not, we want some flexibility because we do things a little bit different as we shift. It's often we'll shift the features within a general head shape to simulate a slight turn of the head. So if we're selecting both eyes, we can create the illusion that the head is turned by moving the eyes across. And if we have a nose and mouth and ears and slide those around on our head shape without doing much else, we do create some sense of space and three-dimensionality within our characters. So if we clone with timing, we can't move them independently, and that can be problematic. Now that particular peg there, that one will move independently, but when I click here, both are going up and down. So generally we don't want that. Generally, when we are working, we are going to just simply say nodes, clone drawings only. And this is something that we can even do with symmetrical characters. If you have symmetrical arms and legs, hands and things like that, that you clone it so that as you make updates to one, it affects the other one. And that's really beneficial because you're able to then set it up where you draw your hands, and if you update the hands or add additional hands, both hands are updated as you're working. Oops. So as I copy pasted this node, it's now acting as a duplicate of that, so we don't want to do that. Sometimes it seems to work and sometimes it acts funny. So another option is we can choose paste special, create new columns, that pastes it in. And now it should allow us to move it over, but it's sitting behind so we can't just click and grab it. So now that's independent. So again, paste special is essentially it's making a duplicate where then that is now not tied in any way to the original. So recommend that you, whenever you're pasting, that you do that. And you can see paste special is Command or Control B as in boy, where normal paste is V. So undo, cut, copy, paste, paste special. So Command B. But now we have two eyes operating independently. Each eye group, if I look at it, it has all of its independent layers and it's been set up quite nicely. So using cutters, using line art and color art, these are all, and overlay and visibility, these are all ways that we improve the efficiency of our project while we are working. So I could now take this arm and I could group that together if I wanted, and the other arm and group that. We can also not put things in groups and just put backdrops behind them, and then that can simplify what we're doing as well. So I'm going to go under node, backdrop. Oh, I don't want to do it quite like that. I wasn't quite thinking. Select the nodes I'm trying to to do it to. And now choose backdrop, and that now allows me to move that arm over there. Now let me move the eyes down so they won't be caught within it. Now if I select the other arm, I can now add a backdrop to that. Again, this allows me to move things around quite handily. Now, the head, the eyes, these are all probably going to be part of, and the head probably wants to have a pivot point. We will have to still set that. We can add a backdrop for the head where we'd have a nose and mouth and whatever else. Attach that to our main character peg, so when we move the whole character, of course, everything moves. So these are all housekeeping things that are good for us to take care of as we start building more engaging and complex characters. So we covered a number of advanced topics here beyond just simply using the cutter. Just think of the cutter, it's a mask or a mat, and it can be regular or inverted. So it either whatever the is being used as that mat, it either hides what's there or it controls the area of what is visible. So regular and inverted. And using cutters and using our individual art layers of line art and color art, multiple composites, these are how we start building a more robust auto patch system as well, and that will be something that we will look at in the future. Good luck and have fun.